So today we will partake of the glory of womanhood. We'll be asking three lovely ladies to come forward, one after the other, and hear what each of them has to say about some aspect of loving God and His holy house. So at this time, I would like to ask our Stewardship Chairman, Angela, please come forward. Angela Georgallis.
Good morning, everybody. So as Father said, I'm Angela Georgallis, the proud chairwoman, alongside my husband George, of our stewardship here at Holy Trinity. Father asked me to speak this morning about my personal story and what stewardship means to me. I'll start off by saying I love this church and I love this community because I truly believe in the amazing goodness of our church and what the church bestows on the greater community at large, as well as on each one of us in our relationship with God. I grew up in a church community just like this one, only it was Catholic. And we lived in a small military town called Spanaway in Washington State. I was raised in a Portuguese and Mexican household where our faith truly sustained us. My parents came from very humble beginnings. My father was first-generation Portuguese, orphaned at a very young age. He was raised in a children's home until he entered the military illegally at the age of 16. Don't ask, that's another story, another day. He enlisted to further his education and to provide for his siblings as the eldest of 7 children. My mother, also first generation, while very bright and determined to travel the world one day, had to work very hard at a young age to help her parents raise her siblings as well. They were a family of 8. My parents didn't have access to education, but vowed to provide an education for their children. And they made incredible sacrifices to send my sister and me to the best schools in Washington State. I knew 3 things to be true in my life growing up. My parents made enormous sacrifices in their adult lives to ensure my sister and I would always have more than they did, that an excellent education was the most important thing I could do for myself, and most importantly, that God and my church would always be there for me. My parents were devout Christians, very active in our church and in our schools. Everything revolved around giving back to our community, and religion was always the focus of our family. Irrespective of life's ups and downs, I knew my parents went without many things for us to have opportunities that they only dreamed of, and they always put the church first. Despite the exorbitant costs of our education, there was never a question of missing the Sunday collection basket. They were faithful and sacrificial stewards. They taught me the importance of giving to the church because they always said, God provided tenfold what you give to the church. This return is so eloquently described through this year's campaign, when stewardship is defined as our opportunity to express our thankfulness, to give of ourselves, and to grow in grace. Stewardship allows us to participate in the work of God here in our community, where we know our church nurtures our faith and the faith of others each and every day. When I moved to Washington, D.C. and met my husband in the mid-90s, I was introduced to the Greek Orthodox Church. I was immediately welcomed by his warm and supportive church community in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I knew instantaneously that this community and a church like it would be an anchor in our lives and the lives of our children one day. That church and our church, Holy Trinity, provides an abundance of riches through ministries like fellowship, support, community upon those that enter it. And ultimately, Wouldn't you agree? That's what makes Holy Trinity such a beautiful and unique place. My conversion to Greek Orthodoxy, first by getting married in the village church in Kos, Greece, where my father-in-law was from, then by my conversion to the faith several years later, and lastly, by our children's baptism in George's childhood church, it all made perfect sense, natural sense to me. Greek Orthodoxy and all it stood for was a perfect continuation of the spiritual community I had grown up with back in my hometown and was now my new home with my new family. I have worked for organizations that I really believe in for more than 2 decades now. I've worked for the American Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and now I work for Duke University. Yes, Duke. And by the way, I hope everyone sold their Nike stock this past Thursday morning. Just gonna say that. I have been a part of teams raising money that has changed lives and provided relief and opportunity for people who needed it most. At Duke, I'm very proud to raise money for an institution where one of its core tenets is providing significant financial assistance to talented, underprivileged young men and women who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to study at a place like Duke. We raise close to $600 million annually, and a large portion of these dollars raised goes to providing financial aid for students. I understand firsthand, given my years of work experience in the nonprofit sector, what it means to have programs and services stop when support does not happen. Organizations, churches, and institutions exist because they have people who believe in them and therefore support them. People like my dad, who would give his weekly donation, even if it was a small amount. He was committed to doing his part. And what matters most is ultimately that he gave. This leads me back to Holy Trinity and my love for this community and this church. As members, it's sometimes difficult for us to understand that the church cannot sustain itself without our generosity. And as we approach the halfway point of this year's campaign, I'm asking each of you to please reflect on the many ways in which the church has enhanced your life and brought you closer to God. Holy Trinity has a growing list of demands, operationally, and also from the needs of the greater community here in North Carolina. For example, think of all the lives that are positively impacted by the amazing work that Deacon Gavrillo and so many of you are doing out in the community. Think of all the wonderful opportunities our children have through Goya, through the dance groups, through sports tournaments and camps, which instills community and fellowship and keeps our children close to God. And recall our 2 recent stewardship speakers, Allie and Kaylee. The future of our church is so strong and inspiring when our kids grow up here. So all this being said, I hope you will view this year's stewardship request not as just another ask from our church, but instead as an act of sacrificial love that will not only benefit Holy Trinity, but also the greater community at large. Thank you again, each and every one of you, for your dedication to our community and to your active participation in Christ's work. Thank you.
Thank you.